At 73, I became a secret millionaire. It happened quietly. Almost too quietly for something that could change a life forever. That I won $73 million in the lottery. But I never told anyone. Not my son. Not my neighbors. Not even the woman who sat across from me at family dinners every Sunday. My daughter-in-law. That I told myself I would wait. That I would think carefully before changing anything. Because money doesn't just change your life. That it changes the way people look at you.So I kept everything the same. I still woke up at 6:30 a.m. I still watered my small garden behind the house. I still went grocery shopping with coupons folded neatly inside my purse. Anyone watching from the outside. I was still the same retired woman living on a fixed income. But silence has a way of attracting attention. And in my case, it was my daughter-in-law who noticed first. Her name was Melissa. She had always been observant. Not in a warm way. More like calculating the AT first. Her questions were harmless. "Are you doing okay with money, Mom?" she asked one afternoon while I was folding laundry. "I'm fine," I said simply, not looking up, but she didn't leave it there. A week later, she asked again. "Are you sure you don't need help with bills? Things are getting expensive these days." Her tone was soft, but there was something underneath it. Something sharper. Like she wasn't offering help. She was testing me. I smiled politely. "I manage," I said. That should have been enough. But it wasn't, because after that, the questions became more frequent, more direct, more personal. One evening, she sat at my kitchen table longer than usual. My son was still at work, so it was just the two of us. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She watched me pour tea, her fingers lightly tapping against the table. "Mom," she said slowly, "do you ever think about selling this house?" I paused. "The house?" I asked. "Yes," she nodded. "It's big. Too big for one person. Maintenance alone must be expensive." I set the kettle down gently. "This house has been mine for over 30 years, I said calmly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know. I just mean it might make things easier. You could downsize. Free up money. Enjoy life more." There it was again, money. Always money. I studied her face for a moment. She wasn't just talking. She was calculating, measuring, rearranging my life in her mind like pieces on a board. "I'm comfortable," I said finally. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't satisfied. Not even close. That night, after she left, I sat alone in my living room longer than usual. The house creaked softly around me. For the first time in years, I felt something strange. Not fear, not sadness, awareness. Because I realized something uncomfortable. These weren't random questions. They were building somewhere, leading somewhere. And I was part of a plan I hadn't agreed to. A few days later, the questions changed again. This time, they came with urgency. "Mom," she said over dinner, "you really should think about your finances more seriously. What if something happens? What if you need long-term care?" My son didn't speak. He just nodded slightly, focused on his plate. But she kept going. "You shouldn't carry everything alone. Family is supposed to support each other." I almost laughed at that. Family, such a beautiful word, so easy to use when it benefits you. "I've managed my life just fine," I said softly, but she leaned forward slightly. "Still, it would be good to know exactly where you stand. Just in case." Just in case. That phrase stayed with me long after dinner ended. Because just in case is never just casual. It is preparation. And preparation always leads to intention. That night, I stood by my bedroom window and looked out at the dark street. My house was quiet, too quiet. And for the first time since I won that money, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. If they ever found out, what would they do? And more importantly, how long had they already been guessing? After that night, I thought the questions would stop. They didn't. In fact, they became more precise, more uncomfortable, more intentional. Melissa didn't just ask anymore. She started observing. Watching me the way people watch something they don't fully trust. A few days later, she came back to my house again. Uninvited this time. She stood in my kitchen doorway, arms crossed, looking around slowly like she was measuring the space. "You really don't think this house is too much for you?" she asked casually. I was peeling apples at the counter. "I've lived here for over 30 years, I said. "It fits me just fine." She nodded, but I noticed her eyes weren't listening. They were calculating. "Still," she said softly, "a place like this, it holds value. A lot of value." That word again, value, not home, not memory, not life, just value. I put the knife down and looked at her. "Why does that matter to you?" I asked gently. Paused a fraction too long. Then she smiled. Oh, it doesn't, she said quickly. I just worry about you. But I had lived long enough to know the difference between worry and interest, and hers was not worry. That evening, my son came home late. Melissa was still there. She had made dinner without asking me, rearranging things in my kitchen like she already belonged there, and my son barely noticed that he was tired, distracted, but she was alert, always alert. During dinner, she brought it up again. Your mom shouldn't be managing everything alone, she said, cutting into her food gently. We should think about long-term planning. My son looked up briefly. What do you mean? He asked. She smiled. You know, finances, property, medical planning. Things that become complicated later. I felt a quiet pressure in my chest. Not anger, not fear, recognition. She wasn't talking like a daughter-in-law. She was talking like someone preparing a case to plan out a structure, something being arranged behind my back. I'm not in any rush to change anything, I said calmly. Melissa tilted her head. That's exactly what worries me, she replied. The silence that followed was heavy. My son didn't speak, he just ate, avoiding the tension like he always did. But I was watching him too, because I noticed something new. He wasn't questioning her. Not once. Later that night, after they left, I stood in the kitchen alone. The house felt different, not physically, emotionally. Like something had shifted slightly out of place. I opened a drawer and saw where she had moved things. Small changes. A spoon here. A document there. Nothing obvious, but intentional. Always intentional. That was when I realized something I had been avoiding. Melissa wasn't just curious. She was organizing my life, quietly, step by step, like someone preparing to take ownership of something they believed was already theirs. The next morning, she called me. Her voice was softer this time, almost sweet. Mom, I was thinking about you, she said. Have you considered adding me to some of your financial accounts? Just for convenience. I froze. For a moment, I didn't respond. Convenience? I repeated slowly. Yes, she said quickly. Just in case anything happens. It's normal in families like ours. Families like ours. That phrase stayed in my mind long after the call ended. Because nothing about this felt normal. It felt structured, planned, rehearsed. I sat down at my kitchen table after hanging up, the same table where I had eaten alone for years. Now it felt like a meeting point. A place where decisions were being made about me, without me. And for the first time since I won the lottery, I felt something shift inside me. Not panic, not fear, clarity, because I finally understood the direction these questions were going. They weren't random, they weren't concern, they were steps. And I was no longer just being watched, I was being positioned. It started with small things, the kind of things most people would ignore, but I didn't, because once you start paying attention, you can't go back to not seeing. Melissa began changing how she spoke to my son. Not loudly, not obviously, but subtly, like someone slowly tightening a thread. One evening, I noticed it at dinner. My son was scrolling through his phone between bites, barely present. Melissa, on the other hand, was watching him, waiting for the right moment. Then she said it. Have you thought about updating mom's financial arrangements? The words didn't belong in a casual dinner conversation. They landed too clean, too prepared. My son looked up slowly. What arrangements? He asked. She smiled softly. You know, access, accounts, planning. It just makes things easier for everyone. Easier. That word again. I felt something cold move through my chest. Not fear, recognition. Because now I understood the direction this was going. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was structure. A system being built around me, without me. After dinner, I watched my son more closely. He didn't question her. Not once. He didn't ask why she was interested in my finances. He didn't ask why she was bringing it up so often. He just accepted it. And that hurt more than anything she said, because silence is agreement. When it lasts too long. A few days later, I found something that confirmed my suspicion. It wasn't dramatic, no confrontation, no loud moment. Just a small detail. A folder on my kitchen counter. It hadn't been there before. Neatly placed, almost intentionally visible. Inside were printed documents. My name. My address. My financial summary. At least what they believed my financial situation was. I stood there for a long time, holding those papers. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. Because instead of fear, I felt something else. Clarity. They had been building a version of my life without asking me, a version where I was dependent, a version where I needed help, a version where I could be guided, or controlled. That evening, Melissa arrived earlier than usual. She saw the folder immediately, of course she did. That was the point. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. "Oh," she said softly. "You found it." I closed the folder slowly. "Yes," I replied. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. That was new. She never used to do that before. "Mom," she said gently, "we're just trying to help you organize things. It's normal at your age to have plans in place." Normal. Another word that sounded harmless, but wasn't, because normal is often just another way of saying expected to comply. "I didn't ask for this," I said quietly. She tilted her head. "But you need it," she replied. There it was, the shift, from suggestion to assumption, from conversation to decision. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my bedroom listening to the house settle around me. Every creak sounded louder than before. Every shadow felt heavier. I kept thinking about the folder, about the way it had been placed, about the way she said you need it. Not we think. Not maybe. You need it. If the decision had already been made, without my permission. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I checked my own accounts, every one of them, slowly, carefully, and that's when I saw it. Small attempts, subtle inquiries, access requests, nothing successful yet, but close. Too close. My daughter-in-law wasn't just asking questions anymore. She was testing doors, seeing which ones might open. And if I hadn't been paying attention, she might have already walked through one. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't, because something had changed. This was no longer about curiosity, and no longer about concern, and no longer about family conversations at dinner tables. This was about movement, quiet movement, strategic movement. And I understood something very clearly in that moment, that I was no longer being observed, that I was being approached, carefully, systematically, like something valuable, waiting to be claimed. I told myself I was overthinking, that people sometimes worry, that family sometimes gets too involved. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true anymore. Something had shifted, and Melissa was no longer just asking questions. She was moving pieces, quietly, deliberately. Like someone building a map of my life without asking me where I wanted to go. The next morning, she arrived earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard her key in the door. She had a key now. That detail alone should have told me everything I needed to know. "Good morning, Mom," she said warmly, stepping inside like she owned the air itself. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I watched her. She walked straight to the counter and placed a thin stack of papers beside my teacup. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just confidently. "I printed something for you," she said. I looked down. More documents, more summaries, more interpretations of my financial life. Except this time, something was different. At the bottom of the page, there were sections marked for signatures. My signature, my approval, my consent. I didn't touch them. "What is this?" I asked quietly. Melissa smiled like she had been waiting for that question. "It's just to simplify things," she said, "so I can help you manage your accounts more efficiently." Help me. That word again. Always dressed in kindness. Always carrying something else underneath. "I don't need help managing my accounts," I said calmly. Her smile didn't fade. It sharpened. "That's not really true anymore, Mom," she said gently. "Things are getting complicated. It's better if someone responsible is involved." Someone responsible. The implication was clear. She wasn't offering help. She was assigning authority over me. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not fear, recognition again. Because now I could see it fully. This wasn't random behavior. This was a system being built step by step. Each conversation, each document, each suggestion. A slow transfer of control disguised as care. My son walked in halfway through the conversation. He paused when he saw the papers. "Everything okay?" he asked. Melissa turned instantly. Perfect timing, perfect tone. "Yes," she said softly. "We're just making things easier for your mom." He nodded. Just like that. No questions. No hesitation. Just acceptance. And that was the moment something inside me went very still, because I realized something terrifying. He wasn't being convinced. He was already aligned. After breakfast, Melissa stayed longer than usual. She started organizing my kitchen drawers. not cleaning. Not helping. Organizing. As if she was preparing the space for a version of my life where she had already taken a central role. I stood in the doorway watching her, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a host in my own home. I felt like a guest. That afternoon, I went into my bedroom and closed the door. I sat down at my old wooden desk, and I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at everything I owned that mattered.My accounts.My documents.My identity on paper, and I saw it clearly now. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. Who decides? Who signs? Who speaks for me when I am not in the room? And Melissa had already started answering those questions for me, without my permission, without my voice, without even pretending anymore that I was part of the decision. I leaned back in my chair. And for the first time since winning the lottery, I didn't feel lucky. I felt targeted. That night, I stopped pretending I was confused, because I wasn't anymore. Everything had become too clear. Melissa wasn't just asking for information. She wasn't just helping. And she wasn't just trying to organize things. She was preparing a version of my life where I no longer had full control. And worse, she was doing it with my son standing right beside her, silent and compliant. The realization didn't come with emotion. It came with clarity. Cold, sharp, irreversible clarity. So I made a decision that I would stop reacting and start watching. The next morning, Melissa arrived again, same smile, same confidence, same quiet authority she had been building day by day. But this time, I was different. I didn't ask questions. I didn't challenge her. I didn't resist. I simply observed. She noticed it almost immediately. "You're quiet today, Mom," she said while placing her bag on my counter. "I'm just tired." I replied that it wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Because I wasn't tired, I was awake in a way I hadn't been before. She stayed longer than usual again. She talked about future planning, about family, responsibility, about making things easier for everyone. Each sentence sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath, I could hear the structure forming, step by step, layer by layer. A system designed to gradually move authority away from me without ever needing to ask for it directly. My son, once again, said very little. He nodded, he agreed, he followed her lead without hesitation. And I watched him carefully this time, not with anger, but with understanding, because I realized something painful. He wasn't being taken from me. He had already stepped aside. Later that afternoon, I did. "Are you so interested in my financial situation?" The room changed instantly. Not something I had never done before. I asked a simple question. "Melissa," I said calmly. "Why dramatically? Not loudly, but subtly, like air shifting before a storm." She paused, just for a second, then smiled. "Because I care about you," she said. But this time, I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence sit. And something interesting happened. She didn't like it. Her smile tightened, just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. And in that moment, I understood something crucial. Silence made her uncomfortable, because silence meant I was no longer giving her information to shape. That evening, after she left, I sat alone at my kitchen table again. But this time, I didn't feel lost. I felt something new. Control. Not over her. Not yet. But over myself. Over my awareness. Over what I was willing to see. I looked at the papers she had brought over the past few days. The signatures. The summaries. The suggestions. And for the first time, I saw them not as help, but as evidence. Evidence of a direction. A plan. A slow, quiet attempt to rewrite my independence without ever saying it out loud. I placed the papers neatly back into a folder, closed it, and set it aside, not because I accepted it, but because I refused to react emotionally anymore. That night, I stood by my bedroom window again. The house outside was dark, still, quiet, but inside me, something had changed permanently. I was no longer the woman being asked questions. I was the woman who understood why those questions were being asked. And that changed everything, because once you see the pattern, you stop being part of it. The next morning, I didn't act differently on the outside. I made breakfast as usual. I watered the plants. I folded the same kitchen towel I had folded 1,000 times before. But inside me, something had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer reacting. I was observing. And more importantly, I was remembering everything. Every question Melissa had asked, every document she had brought, every suggestion wrapped in politeness. Now I saw it clearly. It was not random. It was not concerned. It was Construction. A slow, careful rebuilding of my life, without my voice in it. Melissa arrived mid-morning. She smiled as if nothing had changed, but I noticed something different now that I noticed everything. The way she looked at the kitchen counter first, the way she checked where I was standing before speaking, the way she paused, just slightly, before choosing her words. She was no longer just confident. She was cautious. Because she sensed something had shifted, even if she didn't know what. I brought coffee, she said, placing a cup in front of me. I nodded. Thank you. Simple. Neutral, and no resistance. She studied my face for a second longer than usual. You've been quiet lately, she said. I've just been thinking, I replied. That answer seemed to unsettle her more than anger ever could, because anger is predictable, silence is not. She sat down across from me, placing her hands neatly on the table. I want to make sure we're on the same page, she said carefully. I looked at her. I think that depends on the page, I said calmly. To pause. Very small, but real. Her smile didn't disappear, but it tightened. I just want what's best for you, she repeated. There it was again, the phrase she used every time she needed control to sound like care. But this time, I didn't nod. I didn't agree. I didn't reject her either. I simply let the silence sit between us, and I watched her shift in it. Uncomfortable, just slightly, but enough. Later that afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I made a copy of every document she had brought into my house. Every page, every signature, line, every financial summary she thought I had blindly accepted. Then I placed them in a separate folder. A clean one. My own organization. My own structure. Not hers. That evening, Melissa returned again. Faster this time. More direct. She noticed the folder immediately. Of course she did. She always noticed everything first. What is this? She asked, holding it lightly. I looked at her. It's mine, I said simply. To pause. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That's what I gave you, she replied. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. This is what I kept. Silence. This time, she didn't respond immediately. And I saw it. The first crack. Very small, but real. Because for the first time, I wasn't following her structure. I was creating my own. That night, after she left, I sat alone again. But something was different now. The house didn't feel like it was closing in on me anymore. It felt like a place I was beginning to understand again. Not as a passive space, but as territory. And for the first time since I won that lottery, I wasn't wondering what they wanted from me. I was wondering what I would allow. And that changed everything. The change didn't happen loudly. It never does at this stage. It started with Melissa noticing small things she couldn't immediately control anymore. That I stopped reacting to her suggestions the way I used to. I stopped agreeing too quickly. I stopped filling in the silence she left behind. And that made her uncomfortable. That I could see it in her eyes the next time she came over. She stood in the doorway for a second longer than usual, scanning me like something had changed, but she couldn't name it. Mom, she said carefully, have you thought about what we discussed yesterday? I looked at her calmly. Yes, I replied. At a pause. Her posture straightened slightly. And, she asked, and I set my cup down. And I think I prefer things the way they are. The silence that followed was different from before. Before, silence was something she used to pressure me. Now, it was something she had to sit inside of, and she didn't like it. She sat down slowly, watching me more closely than usual. You know, she said, trying to keep her voice light. We're just trying to protect you. There it was again. Protect. A word that sounded soft but always carried weight. I'm already fine, I said. Her smile flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. That tiny crack of uncertainty, because she expected resistance before, anger, confusion, emotional reaction she could redirect. But I wasn't giving her that anymore. I was giving her nothing she could use. That evening, my son came home later than usual. Melissa met him at the door before I even spoke. I watched from the kitchen as she spoke quickly, quietly, intensely. Not angry, not emotional. Controlled, strategic, and I realized something important. She was adjusting, changing her approach. Because the old one wasn't working anymore. When they both walked into the kitchen, my son looked tired. Melissa looked focused, more focused than before. We think it might be better to revisit the documents, she said gently. My son nodded slightly, then looked at me. Mom, maybe we should just make things simpler, he said. That word again. Simpler. Always simpler, as if my life needed to be reduced to something easier for others to manage. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't soften my voice. I don't need things to be simpler, I said calmly. I need them to be mine. The room went quiet. Even Melissa didn't respond immediately. That was new. She always had a response, always a way to guide the conversation back. But this time, she didn't. Later that night, I heard them talking in the hallway, not loudly, but urgently. Melissa's voice was low, controlled. This is not how it was supposed to go. My son didn't answer immediately. Then I heard him say something I had never heard before. Maybe we should slow down. That sentence changed everything, because Melissa didn't like slowing down. She liked direction, control, momentum, and suddenly, I understood something deeper. For the first time, she was losing it. Not completely, not visibly, but enough that I could feel the shift. The system she had built around me was no longer responding the way she expected. I went back to my room and sat by the window. Outside, the night was still. But inside me, something had fully settled. I was no longer being moved. And no longer being shaped. And no longer being quietly rewritten. And I realized something simple but powerful. You don't always need to fight back loudly. Sometimes, you just stop giving people something to push against, and that is when they begin to reveal themselves. The first sign was subtle, too subtle for anyone who wasn't paying attention. But I was. Melissa stopped smiling as much. Not completely, but enough that I noticed the difference. Her confidence, the kind she wore like armor, was beginning to slip at the edges, and for the first time, she started watching me more than I watched her. That alone told me everything was changing. That morning, she came into the house later than usual. No greeting this time. No casual warmth. Just a direct walk into the kitchen. She placed her phone on the table between us. "Mom," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk about the documents again." I looked at her calmly. "I thought we already did," I replied. A pause. She didn't like that answer. I could see it immediately, because it wasn't resistance. It was finality, and she wasn't used to finality from me. My son walked in shortly after. He stopped when he felt the tension in the room. Melissa turned to him immediately, fast, precise. "This isn't working the way we planned," she said. That sentence changed the air completely. My son frowned slightly. "Planned?" he repeated. She hesitated for the first time. Just a fraction, but I caught it. Then she corrected herself quickly. "I mean the process. It's becoming complicated." But the damage was already done, because words like planned don't slip out by accident. They reveal structure, intent, something built in advance, something I was never meant to fully see. My son looked between us. For the first time, he didn't immediately agree with her. Instead, he asked, "Is something wrong?" And that question, simple as it was, shifted everything again. Melissa forced a smile. "No," she said quickly. "Nothing is wrong. We just want to make sure everything is clear for your mom." But I saw it now, the pressure in her voice, the lack of control she was trying to hide, because clarity was no longer on her side. After he left the room, Melissa stayed behind. This time, she didn't sit down immediately. She paced slightly. A small movement, but for her, it was a crack. "I think you're misunderstanding everything," she said quietly. I looked at her. "I don't think I am," I replied. Silence. Longer this time. Heavier. And for the first time, she didn't rush to fill it. That was new. She was adapting, but adaptation meant she was reacting, not leading anymore. She finally sat down, and when she spoke again, her voice was lower, more careful. "We're just trying to avoid problems later," she said. I nodded slightly. "And what problems are those?" I asked. Another pause. Longer, because now she had to think before speaking, and that was something she wasn't used to doing with me. "We just don't want confusion," she said finally. Confusion. A soft word, but I understood the meaning behind it now. Confusion meant control. Control meant ownership. Ownership meant replacing my decisions with theirs. That evening, after she left, I sat alone longer than usual, but I wasn't unsettled anymore. I was alert, because something had become undeniable. Melissa was no longer confident in her system, and when someone starts to lose confidence, they either escalate. Or they collapse, and I could feel which direction she was heading. For the first time since this began, I wasn't the one being shaped anymore. I was the one shaping the outcome, quietly, without announcing it, without warning. And that realization didn't feel like victory.It felt like preparation. I knew something was coming before it happened. Not because someone told me, but because the silence changed. Melissa stopped pretending. That was the first sign that no more soft smiles at breakfast, no more careful wording. No more waiting for the right moment. Now she moved with urgency, like someone who had decided the time for patience was over. That morning, she arrived with a thick folder. Not the usual thin papers. This one was different. Heavier. Final. She placed it directly in front of me, no hesitation this time. "Mom," she said, voice firm. "We need to finalize everything today." I looked at her. "Finalize what?" I asked calmly. She didn't smile. That alone told me everything had escalated. "Your financial structure," she said. "We've already reviewed it. It just needs your signature." My son was standing behind her. But this time, he wasn't relaxed. He looked pressured. Caught between her certainty and my silence, I opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents I had never agreed to. Power of attorney forms, account authorization transfers, statements that redefined access to my own money to MY lottery winnings, MY life. Everything carefully framed as assistance. I closed the folder and looked at her. "You prepared all this without telling me?" I asked quietly. Melissa didn't hesitate. "We've been discussing it for weeks," she replied. "You just weren't ready to accept it." That sentence landed differently. Not as a suggestion, but as a decision already made. Without me, my son finally spoke. "Mom, it's just for safety," he said. Safety. Another soft word. Another disguised. I turned to him slowly. "Safety for who?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. And in that silence, I saw it. He wasn't confused anymore. He was aligned. Not fully, but enough. And that was worse. Melissa stepped forward slightly. Her voice sharpened now. "If anything happens to you, we need to be able to manage things properly." There it was, the real sentence. Not help, not care, control. I nodded slowly. As if I understood. And for the first time, I didn't resist. I didn't argue. I didn't reject her. I simply said, "I need time to think." Melissa frowned. Time was not part of her plan, but she nodded anyway, because she still believed she was. Ahead, after they left the room, I sat alone at the table, the same table, but the air felt different now. Heavier, not because I was losing control, but because I could finally see how far they had already gone. This wasn't a suggestion anymore. This was a takeover dressed as family care, and they were confident, too confident. That was their mistake, because confidence makes people careless, and careless people reveal everything. That evening, I made my decision, not loudly, not emotionally, but clearly. I would no longer respond to what they said. I would respond to what they did, and that difference would change everything. That night, I didn't sleep, but not because I was afraid, because I was finally ready. For weeks, I had watched them build their plan around me, step by step, document by document, word by word. They thought I was passive. They thought I was simply an old woman who didn't understand what was happening. But they were wrong. I understood everything. And more importantly, I had already prepared something they didn't know about. The next morning, Melissa arrived earlier than usual, but something was different. This time, she wasn't calm anymore. Her movements were faster, tighter, less controlled, and that alone told me everything. Something had already broken in her system. She placed the folder on the table again. Harder this time. Less patient. "We need your signature today," she said immediately. No greeting. No softness. Just pressure. My son stood beside her, but he didn't look at me directly. That was new too. That he was avoiding my eyes, avoiding truth, avoiding conflict. I looked at the folder, then at her. And this time, I smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but knowingly. I said slowly, "You should sit down first." Melissa hesitated, just a fraction, but enough, because she wasn't expecting that tone, that calm, that control. She sat reluctantly. My son followed, still silent, still uncertain. I opened the folder. And this time, I didn't close it immediately. I let them watch me. I let them think they were still in control. Then I said something they didn't expect. "You've been very busy," I said calmly. Melissa straightened. "We're trying to help you," she replied quickly. I nodded slightly. "I know," I said. Then I paused and added, "But I think you should know something too." The room changed, not dramatically, but enough to feel it. Even my son looked up now. I reached beside me, and picked up a small sealed envelope that I placed it on the table, slowly, deliberately. Melissa frowned. "What is that?" she asked. That I looked at her. And for the first time, I let the truth show in my voice. "It's something I should have shown you earlier," I said. Silence. Heavy. Waiting. I continued. "This house. These accounts. Everything you've been trying to organize for me." A pause. "I already reorganized them a long time ago." Melissa blinked. Once, then again. Confusion replaced control. My son finally spoke. "What do you mean?" I looked at him and said the sentence that changed everything. "I won $73 million in the lottery, and I never told anyone." The room froze completely. Melissa's face changed first. Not anger, not shock. Something closer to disbelief, collapsing into panic. "That's impossible," she said quickly. But I continued. "And every account you've been trying to access was already secured under legal protection months ago." I pushed the envelope forward. "You were never reorganizing my life," I said softly. "You were trying to access something you never had control over." My son looked pale now. "Mom," he whispered, but I wasn't finished, because silence had rules now, and I was the one setting them. "I watched you both very carefully," I said, "and I let you believe what you needed to believe, until I understood exactly what you were trying to do." Melissa stood up suddenly. Her chair scraped against the floor. "This is manipulation," she said sharply. I nodded. "Yes," I replied calmly, "just not mine." And for the first time in months, I wasn't the one reacting. I was the one revealing, and that changed everything. The silence after my confession didn't last long, but what followed wasn't noise. It was collapse. Melissa didn't speak for several seconds. She just stared at me, like her mind was trying to rebuild reality faster than it was breaking apart. "No," she finally said. That's not possible." But her voice had already changed. Less confident, less controlled, more fragile. My son sat down slowly, as if his legs had stopped trusting him. 73 million, he repeated quietly. I nodded. "Yes." And for the first time, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Regret. Not anger. Not disbelief. Regret. Melissa suddenly pushed the chair back. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. "This changes everything," she said quickly. Her voice was rising now. Not calm anymore. Not strategic. Emotional. My son looked at her. "Did you know about this?" he asked. The question wasn't loud, but it hit harder than anything else. Melissa hesitated. Just a fraction, but enough. And in that fraction, everything collapsed. "Because silence is an answer." "I was trying to help," she said quickly, but no one responded. Not immediately, because now the meaning of help had changed. It didn't sound like care anymore. It sounded like access, control, ownership. I watched both of them carefully, and for the first time, I saw the structure from the outside, not as a target, not as a participant, but as someone observing a failed system. Melissa's hands were shaking slightly now. She noticed it too, and tried to hide it, but it was too late. The confidence she had built over weeks was gone in minutes. My son stood up, slowly, like he needed distance to think. "Mom," he said quietly, "why didn't you tell us earlier?" I looked at him, not with anger, not with blame, but with something calmer, stranger. "I wanted to see what you would do," I said. That answer made him freeze, because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't emotional. It was truth without apology. Melissa stepped forward again. "No one does this to their family," she said sharply. I nodded. "I didn't do anything," I replied. Another pause. "And that's exactly why you're here now." The room felt different after that, heavier, but also clearer, because the illusion had finally broken. There was no more pretending. No more help, no more planning, only reality. And reality, once revealed, cannot be controlled the same way. That night, after they left, I sat alone again. But this time, I didn't replay their words. I didn't analyze their reactions. I didn't wonder what they would do next, because I already knew. They would try to regain control. Or they would fall apart trying. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't inside their story anymore. I was outside it, watching, waiting, and deciding nothing. Because now, they were the ones reacting, not me. The lawyer arrived 3 days later. No warning, no announcement. Just a quiet knock at the door that felt heavier than anything Melissa had ever said. I opened it myself. And for the first time in weeks, Melissa wasn't the one leading the situation anymore. A man in a dark suit stood at my doorstep, holding a sealed document folder. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked politely. I nodded. Behind me, I heard Melissa's voice before I even turned. "Who is this?" But her tone was different now. Not confident, not controlled, uncertain. The lawyer stepped inside. "I represent Mrs. Carter's financial trust," he said calmly. The room went still, completely still. My son looked confused. Melissa looked frozen, and I simply stepped aside. Because I already knew what was inside that folder. The lawyer placed the documents on the table and began to speak. Mrs. Carter's lottery winnings of $73 million were placed into a legally protected private trust immediately after the win, he said. Melissa blinked. Once, then again. "That means," he continued, "no external family member has had any legal access to her accounts at any point." Silence hit the room harder than any argument ever had. Because now it wasn't opinion.It wasn't emotion.It was law. Melissa shook her head slowly. "No. We were just trying to help manage." The lawyer raised his hand gently. "I'm afraid no management was ever required or permitted." That sentence ended everything she had built. All her documents, all her signatures, all her plans, gone. Legally irrelevant. My son sat down again. This time without looking at Melissa, because something inside him had finally shifted. Fully that he looked at me, not as someone to be managed, not as someone to be helped, but as someone he had never truly understood. "I didn't know," he whispered. I nodded. "I know. No anger, no punishment. Just truth." Melissa stood there longer than anyone else. And for the first time, she had nothing to say. No explanation, no strategy, no control left to grab onto. Because everything she had built, I was never real in the first place. It only existed in her assumptions, not in reality. The lawyer closed the folder. "My role here is complete," he said. And just like that, he left. No drama, no final speech. Just closure. After the door closed, the house became silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was final. Melissa slowly sat down. Not dramatically, not angrily. Just defeated. My son stayed quiet for a long time. Then finally he said, "I think I misunderstood a lot of things." I looked at him, and for the first time in this entire story, I softened. Not because I forgave, but because there was nothing left to fight. "I know," I said gently. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen again, but it didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like my home again. Not because everything had changed outside, but because I had changed inside. That I was no longer the woman they were trying to take control of. I was the woman who had already protected everything before they even began. And in the end, the silence I once used to observe them became the silence that ended everything.